Monster Hunter Rise, a smash hit on the Nintendo Switch where it's a system exclusive, at least for now. We've known a PC port was on its way for quite some time now, and today, while the full game is still about 3 months away, we do have the PC demo. It's identical in content to the second Nintendo Switch demo, with 2 training missions, 3 hunts in 3 layers of difficulty, and 5 major monsters all alongside some small endemic life, and 1 set for every weapon type in the game. And when the Switch version first came out, I made several videos about it, and the graphics in particular. There's only so much the Switch can do after all, so it's very interesting to take a look. And for this game, while I very much liked the art style and general presentation, and performance was nearly always a nice rock-solid 30 FPS, it was obviously not exactly a showcase for clarity and fidelity. In fact, even in docked mode, it ran at an internal resolution that was barely more than 720p. I also lamented how washed out it tended to look, but as you can see, one of the most obvious and immediate differences on PC is a much punchier contrast and more saturated colours. Hooray! The other is, of course, texture fidelity and overall resolution. And man, for a game that for many is as much about the fashion hunting as it is the monster hunting, I'm big fat industrial digging how nice the armors and weapons look on PC. Lovely. Hello again, I am Blunty. Videos like this are always a little bit of a pain in the bum to hammer together, so I'd appreciate a thumb, sub, bell, comment. In fact, let me know in the comments if you're going to move from Switch to PC for this, or have you been waiting in agonizing patience for the PC version to finally drop? Now, amongst the videos I made earlier this year on the Switch version was a couple drilling down into the Switch's graphics. One where I manually color graded and upscaled the Switch footage to see what it could look like, a little punched up. And in the other video, I showed off a device called the M Classic, which is a hardware device that sits in line with the HDMI signal out of the Switch and does some on-the-fly hardware-based filtering and scaling to clean things up a little bit. And it does it live with no latency. It's amazing, and it does a pretty damn good job. In fact, I've continued to use the M Classic to this day on my Switch, but for the sake of being representative here, I have turned it off. So these are raw Switch comparisons. Same with the PC, no extra fiddling there, of course. So, naturally, the other major and obvious differences on PC apart from the contrast in color is the fidelity, the resolution, the texture detail, and of course, the frame rate. I'm running it here in the high settings, the highest possible settings. There is no such thing as ultra in this game apparently. Default options on that. There are some other settings you can fiddle with, of course, as is the PC tradition. Adjusting or disabling the anti-aliasing. There's some film grain and vignette options. A depth of field option, which does look very nice and works smoothly, but I actually prefer playing it with it off for just regular gameplay. Now, of course, this is YouTube, so by now there will be someone whining in the comments about how this is not a fair comparison. It's not apples to apples with the Switch's 756p versus a maxed out 4K on a very powerful PC. But the point here isn't a fair comparison. It's to take a peek at just how much better it can and does and will look on PC. And I did have it capped at 60 FPS for these recordings. I can't see much practical benefit in a game like this running higher. And of course, for a YouTube video, locked at 60 FPS recording is easier to work with and prevents things like screen tearing. But in comparison to the 30 you get on Switch, oh yeah. Oh, you absolutely feel the difference. Not just see it, but feel it. Now, I personally can be pretty sensitive to lower frame rates, not in every game, but certainly for shooters, of course, and third-person action combat games like this one. So the smoothness in look and feel are huge for me. They make a significant difference. Your mileage may vary depending on how sensitive you are to that stuff. Weirdly enough, even with that default anti-aliasing on, which includes TAA and FXAA working together, there's still some stair-stepping I'm seeing, even at 4K. Nothing bad, but it's there if you go looking for it, and I wouldn't normally expect that with TAA and FXAA working side by side. In fact, you usually wind up with quite a soft image when those two work together, which is why I very rarely have them on, especially when I'm at 4K. When a 4K resolution kind of reduces the usefulness of anti-aliasing anyway, because you're not seeing that much anti-aliasing at 4K resolution, but in here you do see it. So I'm thinking not everything is actually internally at 4K. And aside from the obvious difference in texture detail, especially in the monster's armor and weapons, yay, there's a lot of minor differences that all kind of add up together to a generally more pleasant visual impression. The water looks nicer, of course, especially from a distance where the high resolution and better atmospherics hide the weird tailing effect you'd see on Switch pretty often. And naturally, the reflections seem to be higher resolution too, though still standard screen space reflections, nothing as fancy as ray tracing. Shadows are vastly improved, and even the weapon effects and bursts now run at full resolution. A small difference in the heat of battle, certainly, but one that does make everything feel just so much cleaner and crisper. Foliage looks nicer, and it's denser as well. If you look on the leaves of the bamboo trees in some of these shots, you'll see they're much better foliage up there, more detail, more leaves. Although the basic geometry of the ground it all sits on still makes the graphics look a little bit dated by today's standards. I wish the demo had access to some of my favourite maps, like the ice caves in the Frost Islands and the lava caverns in the volcano. The basic Shrine Ruins map is a long way from being the nicest looking or most interesting map location in the game. So believe you me when I tell you, even at its best looking on PC, this is not the best this game will look. There are much nicer maps in the full game. Of course, you'll never mistake this game, even at its absolute best on PC, even on the prettiest map, with even the medium settings on Monster Hunter World's grittier, much less stylistic graphics. But side by side with the Switch, it is a vast improvement, as you would hope. But it's also not quite as vast as I'd hoped. The map geometry, for one, like I mentioned, I wish it was cleaned up a bit to smooth out some of those hard edges and round out the obvious polygon shapes on the things that are supposed to be round, like cave entrances and whatnot. And I want more ground clutter, or at least PBR textures on the ground to help it look not so flat. That would have been nice. I also had a small hope, a very small hope, that the move to DX12 graphics API for PC would entice them to use some of DX12 Ultimate's features. Top of that list, of course, ray tracing shadows, ray tracing lighting, and ray traced reflections. In a game that's otherwise graphically undemanding in a PC context, I'd imagine you could turn all three of those on and up and still get damn good performance on even a modern mid-range GPU. Interestingly, and somewhat annoyingly by the way, the game natively supports the proper on-screen button icons for Xbox One, Xbox Series, and PlayStation controllers, but bafflingly, it doesn't support Switch controllers. While this may not seem like much of a big deal, a lot of Monster Hunter players on PC will be using PlayStation controls because that's what they used to, because many of the old school fans have spent most of their game time on various PlayStation platforms in previous iterations of the game. The others on PC, well, obviously an Xbox controller is basically default for PC gaming. So there's probably not that many PC gamers who use a Switch controller regularly, but the thing I miss about the Switch Pro controller with this game is, believe it or not, the lack of analog triggers. See, this game has no need for analog switches, doesn't use them, and in fact, the way the shoulder buttons are used, it feels way more responsive on the Switch's Pro controller's very shallow and very snappy shoulder buttons compared to the Xbox's spongier analog ones with the deep click. Especially on weapons like the Switch Axe, one of my personal mains. It uses the shoulder button for a weapon transform, so the slight sloppiness that comes with a deep press of an analog shoulder button on Xbox or PlayStation, well, it takes some getting used to. It just does not feel as good or as responsive as the Switch controller does. And considering this is literally a port of a previously Switch exclusive game, which means they have the correct button map and they have the icons for the screen, it's bewildering that native Switch input is not accounted for. You can, of course, still use a Switch controller, of course. Steam itself natively supports it, but all of your face button prompts on screen will be wrong. X for Y, A for B, all inverted, stupid, annoying, confusing. Why? Just why? Hopefully this gets fixed for launch, because it is a weirdly stupid omission. Nothing to do with graphics and performance or visual experience, of course, but it is part of the UI, so I wanted to mention it here. Speaking of the UI, one more thing PC gamers will demand of Capcom. I can tell you right now, they're probably already out there on the forums, on the Reddit, talking about this. I promise you they'll be screaming about this for the next 3 months. The ability to scale down the UI. This UI is made for low-res, couch viewing distance, and handheld gameplay. The console experience, in other words. It is way too big and way too intrusive by PC game standards, where you are sitting literally a meter and a half from the screen, and you are playing at nice high resolutions. If Capcom don't address this, I bet you it'll be one of the very first mods someone tries to make. Hopefully the anti-cheat and DRM crap doesn't stop that from happening. If Capcom doesn't listen first, I really hope they listen, because this UI on PC is way too obtrusive. It's huge. So yeah, I think I've talked about all the stuff I wanted to talk about, and you've seen for yourself the side-by comparisons for anything you are looking for. Obviously, I'm looking forward to getting started on proper PC with this game. Still lamenting not having cross-save or cross-progression or even cross-play with the Nintendo Switch Edition, but not really all that sad about having to experience the whole game from bottom to top all over again. Oh no, I have to play one of my favorite games ever from the start again. Oh, what will I ever do? What a nightmare. And you know what? Might as well go with a feminine hunter this time around, seeing as many of the armor pieces are quite different looking between the masculine and feminine variants. So there's a silver lining for having to start from scratch. Now, I just have to decide which weapon I'll start maining. I carried a hunting horn right through to endgame on Switch and then switched to Switch Axe. Maybe I'll start on Switch Axe this time, or pop back to Sword and Shield like I carried in World, or step onto something different. Oh, the next 3 months are going to be long and full of many what-ifs. But thank you for watching. I am Blunty. Hopefully you found this interesting and or useful. And hopefully if you have, you've done the thing. We've left a comment, left a thumb, subbed and belled and all that sort of stuff. And thank you, as always, to the patron scrolling up above there, who's above and beyond support. I value very much, as well as the rest of you who've managed to make it to the end of the video. That helps too. I am Blunty. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.